Let me go ahead and I'll share my screen here. Right, excellent. So just to bring us back, it's been a few days since the last time we were all together. Maybe some of this JavaScript stuff has floated away in the meantime. So as a reminder, our last module that we're talking about before we got to that project was really just our introduction to JavaScript. So we got to learn about different types. We got to learn about how to write JavaScript. That's when we started to introduce and talk about sort of the code editor and running things in the terminal versus having an HTML page to demonstrate our code. Right, so very different, very new way of working with technology than you all might be used to, working with HTML and CSS. So that was just the intro. One thing we might have noticed from those programs that we were writing was that when we were writing code, right, we just sort of wrote it from top to bottom, and our interpreter ran each line of code one after another. Learned about how to declare variables, learned about how to store different values in those variables, right? So we're learning kind of the basics. In this module, and over the next about 2 weeks or so, we're going to be practicing more about controlling the flow and sort of managing our programs in sort of a different way. So today we're going to start with comparison operators, and I believe we'll be ending with loops by the end of this module. So this is going to change how our programs run, and it's really going to adjust how we think about and how our computers think about our programs. So it's going to give us a lot more decision-making tools so that we can build more powerful programs. Whereas before we were only able to sort of declare what was going on and print out some statements, we're now going to be able to introduce some logic, some decision points into our code. So that's going to quickly skill up, quickly improve and expand the type of programs we can write, as you all will see. So we're going to start today with comparison operators as discussed. I think today's lesson, we'll see where we go. There's a couple of kind of tricky parts in here, but I think it's pretty short, pretty straightforward. We'll try and make sure we have enough time at the end for you all to work on the lab individually. And I think today might be a good time too, if you have any questions from our previous lessons, anything that's feeling a little confusing, maybe working on a project and are just not feeling sure about something, now would be a really good time to think up those questions, write them down, we can talk about them at the end. Because I think once we get started with our next few lessons, the speed's going to increase. So as much as we can solidify this foundation, the better it's going to be for you all. All right, let's dive into it. So in this lesson, we're going to learn about comparison operators in JavaScript. I actually saw some of you all using this already, so some of you might know a bit about this. You're going to understand how to use these operators to compare values and make decisions in your code. So our hope is by the end of this lesson, you'll be able to use some of these comparison operators. You can see a bunch of these symbols right here. We're going to understand the difference between strict and type converting comparisons. And then finally, we'll apply comparison operators in conditional statements in some small ways. All right, let's go for it. First, to start with some warm-up questions, we're going to talk about some data types today. So to start, what is the purpose of the boolean data type in JavaScript? What do you all think? I've got 4 options right here. Excellent. Type it out. Let's do it. How many folks? We got 13 participants today. All right, folks are throwing out C. So to represent true or false values. Correct. So the only 2 valid boolean values of that data type are true and false. All right, let's talk about this one. What is the purpose of the string data type in JavaScript? What's the purpose of the string data type? All right. Thanks for throwing out answers. More C. That is indeed true. So in this case, the string data type represents textual data. Remember, we had a few different ways we can write strings. We can use single quotations, we can use double quotes around it, or we can use those backticks to create template literals. All of those are options depending on sort of the context and what you like. How about the number data type? What is the purpose of the number data type? I feel like I'm sensing a theme. for some of these answers. It's feeling a little suspicious, right? Yeah, so in this case, we're representing numerical data. So numerical data, remember, is whole numbers, right? So that's like 4 or 99. Also can do negative numbers, so -3, -4. It can also do decimal numbers. That could be 1.5 or 0.01. We also have infinity and negative infinity. Those are two sort of special keywords that JavaScript has for us. And remember, we also have not a number, which is often the result of trying to maybe like add a number and something you're not supposed to, perhaps, or doing some kind of odd operation with them. Not a number represents as NaN, so NaN, and that data type is in fact a number as well. All right, last one. What's the purpose of the undefined data type in JavaScript? Actually, there might be one more I might have lied. I'm sorry. There's a couple more. One more. What's the purpose of the undefined data type in JavaScript? All right, excellent. Whew. It's getting nervous there on VC, right? All right, so in this case, undefined is to represent a variable that has not been assigned a value. So it's you can do it. You are allowed to assign the keyword, the data type undefined to a variable, but we typically wouldn't do that. Instead, undefined is the default value if you just declare a variable. So something like let x, and you just do a little semicolon after that. That value, if you access it, will be undefined. In contrast, what is the purpose of the null data type in JavaScript? Right. Nice. I see people. We're waking up. We're going for it. Yes, in this case, is this to represent an empty or non-existent value. So this is explicit. We're saying, hey, we're holding on to this variable as part of our program. It might get filled later, right? We're intentionally declaring this variable as nothing. All right, the last one. What is the data type of the return value of the prompt function? Whew, lots of technical terms in there. Data type of the return value of the prompt function. Yeah, excellent, y'all. All right, so in this case, it is a string. So let's break down this question a little bit and just sort of refresh our brains what we talked about last week. So first of all, we're talking about data type. Data type is what we were talking about when we're saying things like undefined, string, number, right? There are 5 core essential JavaScript data types that we learned about. There are others. Those are the core ones we learned about. So we're asking what data type, what form is returned from the prompt function. When we're talking about the returned value. Return value, remember, is when we have some sort of expression, sort of a block of code, that is going to evaluate to, is going to return something from it. So you could say, like, for example, 4 plus 4, the return value of the expression, that expression will evaluate to the number 8, right? In this case, prompt, when we call prompt function, it's going to return a data type of string. So that's what we're expecting back from the prompt function. Okay, the prompt function, remember, we learned about prompt last time. We have on the front end with HTML and CSS, we had things like prompt, alert, confirm. Those are built into the browser. And so we installed, or on Codio, we had installed a tool, a library called prompt sync that gave us access to the prompt function. And that allowed us to, in the terminal, then ask questions and receive some kind of prompt for it. But no matter what kind of data we put in, or what we intend to do as humans, when we typed in, for example, like maybe your age, if you type in a number, it's still coming back as a string. So we had to do some work to make sure we were able to accurately work with whatever data type came back. Excellent, y'all. Yes, agreed, Dragos. This would be nerve-wracking if you just see C's and A's all the way down. It'd be a little weird. All right. Well done, y'all, on those warm-ups. Hopefully, y'all are feeling nice and warm. So now we can get into talking a little bit about type coercion. This does relate to comparison operators, but is also connected to what we were talking about before. So understanding type coercion is crucial when working with comparisons and control structures in JavaScript. So let's say you have two numbers. Two variables. One is a number and the other is a string. If you try to add them together, you might get a surprising result. So we've talked about this a few times, right? I'll just plug this code up here. And we can run it. So if we have the number 10 and the string 5 and add them together, right, we end up with a data type that is a string. And we're just sort of joining those two things together. So you don't remember what the specific word was for this when we add, we use the plus operator to add two values together. They end up in a string. There's a particular word we used for this earlier. Or if not, just want to do a quick check here. Nah, all right. So we had string concatenation. Concatenation was one of the words we used when we were adding two strings together. Right. In this case, if you add a number in, it's going to convert that over to a string. So value of type coercion example will be the string 105. That's because JavaScript does what's called type coercion when it performs an operation like this on two values that are not of the same type. So just a little bit of a background note. So JavaScript is very flexible. Remember, we talked about how it was created over the course of 10 days. That was its initial start. And although it's grown a ton since then, there are still some things that make it quite different than other programming languages. In other programming languages, you might receive an error, an actual like your code would stop running if you're trying to perhaps add or manipulate two different data types and turn them into one data type without explicitly doing so. So JavaScript instead tries to figure out what you're trying to do. Sometimes it'll figure it out right, other times it'll figure it out wrong. Thankfully, it is consistent. So what this means is when you add a number and a string, we add them together, we end up coercing, we change, forcibly change the number type into a string. So we're taking these two data types and resulting in one data type at the very end of it. So in this case, instead of converting val2 to a number and performing the addition operation, JavaScript's type coercion effectively converted value 1 to a string and performed a different operation called string concatenation, which uses the same operator as addition. So our job right now is going to figure out how does JavaScript decide to do certain steps, right? How does it decide to turn this into a string as opposed to into a number? All right. So for this example, so JavaScript performs automatic type coercion. That means it's going to do it on its own without you asking it explicitly to do so based on the context of the operation. When you use an operator like plus or minus with operands of different types, it follows certain rules to determine how to coerce the values. So here are some of the key principles here. So if either operand, so I'll talk first about string concatenation. If either operand of the plus operator is a string, JavaScript will treat the other operand as a string and perform string concatenation. So we have another example we can plug in here. So one rule to think of is when we're adding, we use that plus symbol and we have a string involved, we're going to end up with some kind of string. We can run this code. 47. All right. And I would say this makes sense. More often than not, when you think about early days of the internet, when would we be doing something like this? In this case, it might be, for example, a user gets to a checkout page. We want to say, thanks, your total is whatever, right? 300 pounds, whatever it might be. So in this case, we want to be able to add these two values together. We're going to end up with a string. So that's the default for our plus operator. For other numeric operations, if both operands of the minus multiplication, division, or modulus operation numbers, JavaScript performs numeric operations. If one operand is a string that can be converted to a number, JavaScript attempts to coerce that string into a number and then performs the operation. So let's take a look at that. So if we run this code here, we come back up. So in this case, with the minus operator, it's going to go ahead and see that string and try and transform it into a number. So it says 42 minus, so string 7, let's just turn it into the number 7. We're going to go ahead and subtract that. So that's basically going to be the case for everything else but the plus symbol, right? The other sort of standard arithmetic operators. What do y'all think is going to happen if I put in a less clear string? Something like this. So before we had a string as 7, we could imagine maybe getting that back from the prompt or something like that. What do you think will happen here? yeah, maybe it'll interpret it as 0, right? Let's go ahead and run it and take a look. So in this case, we end up with not a number. So instead of getting converted to a value, this string, it just says, I don't know what to do with this. And because it is the non-plus operator, so it's a minus, multiplication, division, etc., it just turns it into not a number. I don't know what would be better here, but this is kind of how it is. Just for fun, let's try a different one here. So go ahead and make a guess what you think is going to happen. So now instead of a string, I'm putting in a boolean value here. Let's see what happens. 41. Okay, so just to check that, and maybe why that is, I'll put in false here, and that comes back as 42. So remember, we talked about this last week, where true can often be represented as 1, and false can be represented as 0, right? So there can be definitely some tricky situations that go on here. I'll say in general, we'll continue through these, but if you end up with something like this, you're ending up with an odd value you're not expecting, a better thing to do than rely on this kind of coercion is to be more explicit. So if you're working with some value that's 7, I would explicitly somewhere change that 7 into a number, so you're not having to sort of assume JavaScript's going to do the right thing, because it can get kind of confusing. All right, we just took a look at this. So in this case, true ends up being 1, false ends up being 0, right? So we can see that as well. I can't entirely imagine. I'm sure there's situations where you might want to do something like this, but definitely a little strange. And the last situation here. So here we have a Boolean value of true and a string of the word true. We are using the concatenation operator, right? That plus operator. So we are going to end up with a string. It's going to coerce that Boolean into a string as well. We tried a different operator here. Notice we end up with not a number. It's trying to perform some sort of arithmetic. Neither of these are the right kind of value, and so it ends up as not a number. Really, the determining factor for that is true the string, right? It can't subtract this true string. All right, so a bit strange, and I'll say this to kind of just contextualize. The thing to know, I say the main takeaway is two things. One is whenever you're using the plus operator with a string, you're going to end up with a string. It's pretty much always going to be true overall. The other thing I think to keep in mind is if you use any of these other arithmetic operators, you're going to end up with probably a value that you're not expecting. And maybe one final note is, in general, if we're using the arithmetic operators, we don't want to be using anything but numbers. We really want to be relying on, the actual numbers to do these mathematical operations, even though JavaScript will allow us to do it. So even though it doesn't throw an error, that doesn't actually mean it's the right thing to do. Travis is asking that question. So the second true would be Boolean. The result would be 0. I see. So I think it looks like I'm guessing you just tested this out. So I'm guessing you're saying true minus true. Yeah, so in this case, right, we get converted to 1 minus 1. A little strange, but I guess if you subtract true from true, you end up with false. That kind of makes sense, I suppose. All right, any questions about this content so far? I would say it's straightforward, but I don't know if it is. It's a little weird. But I would say in terms of importance, it's something to sort of keep in mind and know that if you're ending up with a value that you're not expecting, this might be something to take a look at. All right. Excellent. So we had two different words here, and I'll do my best to be as clear as possible here, but we have type coercion versus type conversion. So both type coercion and type conversion play important roles in JavaScript when we're working with different data types. Type coercion happens automatically in JavaScript, right? We're coercing it. We're trying to persuade it to be different value. While type conversion is a manual task performed by developers to ensure consistency and accuracy in data handling. It's important to comprehend those differences just to write reliable JavaScript code. And it's always going to be aware of potential pitfalls when it comes to using automatic type coercion in JavaScript. While it can be convenient, it's important to exercise caution. So essentially, this is kind of what I've been saying. It is better to rely on type conversion, and actually explicitly define what values you want to be working with than to rely on type coercion. Plenty of programs do rely on type coercion if you know them well. It can be a nice sort of shortcut or a nice little clever trick, but in general, you want to be more explicit. And so remember the different tools we had to do that. Remember, we had capital N number, we had capital B boolean, we had different ways to transform values into strings. Doing so explicitly will often save you a headache later in your programs than sort of getting something to work and being like, great, just no one touch it. We're going to rely on type coercion here. All right, that is the conversion versus coercion bit. So now, understanding a bit about those types, we can more clearly get into talking about comparison operators and how to compare two values to one another. So JavaScript uses comparison operators to evaluate values and return a Boolean value, either true or false. This allows our programs to make decisions based on different conditions and scenarios. There are several comparison operators available in JavaScript. So let me actually get to the easier ones a little bit first. I'll just point out those, and then we'll scroll back up here. So these ones should hopefully feel somewhat familiar to what you all have seen, in the past, like a math class, something like that, where we have greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. These ones are typically going to be compare numbers, although as we'll see, we can compare other types of values as well. We also can check equality. So we have 4 different ways to check equality. So we can check loose equality with double equals. We can check strict equality with triple equals. We can check loose inequality with that exclamation point, the interrobang, equal sign. And we can check strict inequality with the interrobang and 2 equal signs afterwards. So both 2 different ways to check equality, or rather, we can check equality and check inequality, and then we have a loose and a strict version of it. So the difference between the loose and the strict version is that for loose, we're checking if the operands are equal to one another, and for strict equality, we're checking if operands are equal and of the same type. So suppose trying to describe that more, I think let's get into an example so we can start to see some of the differences here. All right, so as described here, we have loose equality and strict equality. This is going to be really essential to understand how these things are different from one another. Otherwise, you might end up with something a bit odd in your code. All right, we have some examples here. I'm going to give you all just a minute or so. I would love for you to run this code. I'll do it as well. Take a look, and you, of course, can read the left-hand side and try and deduce what are we talking about when we're talking about loose equality. What would that mean, right? So just based on what you can read and what you can see with your own eyes, we're going to try and do a little bit of pattern seeking here. Once you feel like you have a good idea of it, either keep that in your head or share that in the live chat. We'll give you all, again, about a minute or so to look through this. I want you all to come kind of with a definition based on what you see for loose equality. All right, we'll give you folks another 30 seconds or so. Again, don't stress too much about reading through all of this. Just want to get sort of your first thoughts on, based on the results here, what do we think is going on? Yeah, excellent. We have some ideas coming in, much appreciated. All right, so let's talk about it. So maybe this feels a little bit different. I do want to kind of encourage us to just run some code and then try and do a bit of kind of like scientific discovery work, a bit of investigation. Often what I really like about JavaScript is that if something's not working, there's probably a reason why. It's not necessarily just random or my browser, right? It doesn't necessarily have to be just my machine is different. There's probably some sensible explanation here. So if we take a look at this first example, we have a equals 11. And then down here in our console log, we're saying a, and we're using loose equality, that's the 2 equal sign, is 11. These are indeed the same numbers, the same data types. And so our output here is true. So remember our equality that is checking is going to return, it's going to evaluate to a Boolean value. And when that happens, it's checking the equality of these two things. 11 does equal 11, returns true. This is kind of how we'd expect it to work, right? In this next case, we have b, which equals 13, and then we're comparing it to the string 13. So these are two different data types, right? But in this case, we get back true, get back the value true. So what could this mean? Well, based on what we just talked about, and sort of thinking contextually here, right? In this case, we are coercing. We're trying to coerce and guess. Like their JavaScript was trying to guess, hey, I have this number 13 and I see this string, I can get a number from it. Let me go ahead and compare those values to it. So it's comparing the number 13 to the string 13, and it's loosely saying, yeah, they're equal. They're different data types, but they're equal to one another. That's why we end up with true right here. This last one, and I see some comments about this, I'll get to it in just a second here. We see here, there's a string hello world, all lowercase, and then we see a string hello world with uppercase characters as well. In this case, we get back false. This is kind of interesting, right? So we said loose equality. When we take a look at the number 13 and the string 13, it says, yeah, sure, these are basically the same. When we take a look at these values, as humans, we might look at this and be like, yeah, they're kind of the same. But in this case, JavaScript does not consider this the same. There are different values for capital characters than there are for lowercase characters. I don't want to go too much into that, but essentially in terms of comparing strings, those strings have to be exactly the same. Dracosh, I guess I want to know more what you mean in terms of a mirror concept, but maybe, perhaps. Let's see, for C, there are capital letters and one, not the other. That is why, yeah, not the same string for JavaScript, yeah. So JavaScript is quite particular about capital letters overall. Okay, thank you, yeah, for clarifying. So in terms of mirror principle, I think what Dragosh was getting at was, as long as it sort of looks the same, in this case, it's going to equivocate in some way. Yeah, I think that's like a nice way to think about it. Am I gonna remember what this function is? Well, we can talk about the different. Let's see, yeah, here we go. Okay, strings and why this might matter. So character codes is what card code is referring to, and this is a string method you can call on strings. This gives us the numerical representation of that character. This is sort of an internal guts thing for JavaScript. When we look at a lowercase character, compare that to an uppercase character, you'll notice these things are indeed different. So that is part of the reason why JavaScript does not believe these two values are the same. You can kind of see that with this. Right, these are actually slightly different values. That helps in terms of thinking of like, why does this not make the, why are they not considered the same? There you go. If that feels like too much information, no worries. In this case, just with strings, they have to be exactly the same. All right, I think we talked through all of this. This was loose equality, right? Just two equal sign. Okay, one thing to notice here is that if we said a equals 11, that's very different, right? That is assignment. In that case, we are assigning a new value to a. So the comparison operator is at least two equal sign. All right, let's compare that to strict equality. So for strict equality, we have two examples here now. In this case, we'll go ahead and run it. And I think you all can probably already tell the difference between these things. Right, so in our first example, we have a set to be the value of 11, the number 11. And for our first console log, we're checking, hey, does the number 11 equal the number 11? Yes, it does. So in this case, the loose and strict equality operators are exactly the same. They return the same result. Where it differs is with values of a different type. So in this case, we have 13 the number and 13 the string. In our previous example, for loose equality, this would return true. But for strict equality, in this case, it's going to return false. There's no type coercion that is trying to push one of these values into a different type. So strict equality is called triple equals, often sort of its colloquial term. In this case, it's checking, hey, is this the same value and the same data type? I'm not going to do any type coercion. First of all, any questions on this? This is kind of a weird idea that we have two different ways to check for equals, but any questions on this? All right, let me ask you, I want to ask a couple of questions here. First, why do you think we have both of these in JavaScript? What do you think the purpose is of this? Based on what we've talked about so far, based on what we've learned, why does JavaScript have these two different symbols, these two different equality symbols? I mean, one would seemingly work, right? If we just were able to check equalities. What do you think the use was of this? What do y'all think? That's right. I know it's tricky. I'll give you all a few seconds. Let's think about what we talked about with JavaScript. We talked about how it was built very quickly. We talked about how it was built for the front end, right, to allow interactions. So one of the reasons we might have ended up with double equals and triple equals. So remember what we talked about when we had prompt, right? And user input getting returned always as a string. There's something convenient about if we know always when we get user inputs, always gonna come back as a string. Maybe let's put together an operator that will just convert between, for example, if I ask someone to type in their age, I can just use double equals and I can compare those to some kind of value, right? That type coercion can actually become useful. So in an environment where we're expecting all user input to come in one certain data type, right? Double equals could be useful. And that's the initial environment that JavaScript was in, where the only way to talk to it was via clicks and via strings, right? That was the only way for users to really interact with it on a website. So that's kind of my thought behind why you might have doubles and triple equals is that type coercion was happening all the time. And so there's a tool built in to make it a little bit easier. With that said, which one do you all think is more clear? Double equals or triple equals? If you're going to rely on, if you just had one, what do you think, which one would you want to rely on? I'd love when we already get contrasting. Okay, and that's become like a true developer. It depends. That's always the right answer. Yeah, okay. Yeah, so folks are saying, it kind of depends, me preferring one over the other. Here's what I would say, and again, this is a developer opinion. So both will work. If you understand how to use both, you can use whatever you want. In my opinion, I would always stick with triple equals. The reason being, kind of like I talked about before, implicitly writing your code in a certain way can feel clever, particularly if you know JavaScript well. I'll just say for myself, I'm not above using a double equals by any means, particularly if I'm writing something kind of just for my own edification. But with triple equals, it's much clearer, and the return value you get back from it is what you would kind of expect to get back from it. As you all go on to work in the industry, you'll work with folks who maybe are super on top of JavaScript and are excellent JavaScript developers who've been working with it for years. Other folks, though, might dabble in JavaScript and work more with Python or Java or something totally different. And so in this case, triple equals works as you would expect across different types of languages and sort of is what folks would expect. So I think triple equals is pretty much always going to be a bit clearer. That said, both will work. And ultimately, I think consistency is probably the most important thing. So if you're relying on triple equals, sticking with that. If you're relying on double equals, either having a strong reason to or sticking with that, those are going to be the important things. But whatever makes sense. But I will say can be confusing when you're learning to code is just switching between both of them. Because when you come and revisit your code a week later, you're going to feel confused as to like, wait, why did what value is this coming in as and things like that. So if I had to make a suggestion, I would stick with triple equals, but it of course is up to you all. All right, so that is the equality operator. Let's talk about loose inequality. So here we're checking whether values are not equal to one another. So for this one, let me actually give you all a moment or so to go through this as well. I'll go ahead and run the code and just want you all to take a think through how does this work? What's the purpose of this? Derive some conclusions from it, and then we'll talk about it as a group. So take just a minute or so to look through the examples, run the code, think about what you're seeing. Right, we'll give you another 30 seconds or so. All right, excellent, y'all. So if you're looking for some examples, you may notice, I mean, if you haven't really been thinking about, you don't have any background in logic kind of stuff, which is a weird, a weird thing to be thinking about, perhaps. This can get a little confusing. So I'll do my best to be really clear about it. But thankfully, I think it is straightforward, it does make sense. But as we talk about it, it kind of feel a bit trickier, confusing. So I'm actually going to start with example one right here. So this is the most straightforward one. So in this case, we're checking between two variables. Notice we're declaring these variables with the const keyword. We set A and B. We use a single equal sign to assign the numbers on the right-hand side to those variables. We have 10 and 20. We want to know if 10 and 20 are not equal to one another. So I'm just going to play around with this just for a second so we can get some really clear output here, which means a tiny bit bigger as well. Let's clear this. Okay. So let's actually first use our strict equality, right? Does 10 equal 20? In this case, no, right? We kind of know that, and we run the code, we get that same value. So it is indeed false. So what we're checking with not equal is we're saying, hey, are these things not equal to one another? Are they not equal to one another? So when we run that, we get true. So just to clarify, the reason we're getting true is because that statement, A does not equal B, is a true statement. Sometimes that can feel confusing because we're saying we're adding not in there, which feels like we're kind of flipping some values around. But just think of it as A does not equal B. Is that a true or false statement? That is a true statement. A does not equal B, right? So that's what we're doing with this first example here. Now let's bounce around to this example right at the top up here. So up here, we're saying is 95, the number, not equal 95, the string? Are these two values different from one another? That is the statement we're evaluating. When we run that, we get false. And apologies, I left this console log in here. So we get false. These two, number does not equal string. That is a false statement. So what's happening here, right? So this is strange because we're getting, these values are getting coerced so that both of these values are numbers, right? JavaScript is looking at 95 and it's saying, oh no, that is the same value over here. So they are equal to one another. This statement is false. So we end up with a false statement here. So if you're feeling confused about this, one way is just to flip, is to invert it, right? Depending on the kind of statements we want to ask, we may be able to make different decisions. So here, if we said, does this number equal this string, and run it, right, we get true. This is kind of what we'd expect to be the case for our double or loose equality operator. Not is just flipping the value of that, right? We're just saying this is not true. Any questions on this before I move ahead? I know kind of talking about this can be tricky because of that not word that gets added in there. Yeah, excellent explanations, Jargosh. All right, let's look at our last example down here. So this one I would say is pretty straightforward and is a good example of when you might really want to use this. So here we have two different cities, Kathmandu and La Paz. And we have a new variable here called are cities different? I actually like this variable structure, this name, because it's sort of like a question, right? Are these cities different? In this case, we're saying, does city one not equal city two, right? And that is true. City one is not the same as city two. And so with this variable, we could then make some decisions of, hey, perhaps it's two users are trying to find matching vacation locations. And in this case, these locations do not match. Who knows? So this is a good example of when this might get used. All right. For strict inequality, we're expecting the same thing over here in terms of the strictness of it, right? We're checking for data types, but now we're flipping it on its head and we're doing not equals equals. So before running this, I'll just give you all a second. What do you think are going to be the values here? So go ahead and make a guess. Let's type it in live chat. What do you think? Is this going to be false or true? Is this going to be false or true? Is this going to be false or true? What are these going to evaluate to? Don't run it just yet. What do you all think? Question mark indeed. Who knows? Come with the rest of y'all. What do you think? Yeah, we have 4 console log statements here. All right, hopefully you all have an idea in your head. Let's go ahead and run this and let's talk through it. Okay, so let's talk through first why this value up here is true. So this number, the question we're asking is, is the number not equal to the string? Is that a true statement? So in this case, the way we can think about this is because we're using strict inequality, these are 2 different data types. Therefore, they are going to be unequal, right? That is a true statement. These things are not equal to one another. So that's why we end up with true. For these next ones, for this first one, we get false, right? We have false over here because these 2 values are indeed the same value. They're the same data type and they're the same value. For everything else afterwards, this is kind of as we saw before, right? So in the case of B, we have the number 13, we have the string 13. Those things are not equal to each other. That is true, right? It's a true statement. You see that here, same as up above. And then for this last one, as I learned before, because of the capital letters, those 2 strings are not equal to one another. And so even though they are the same data type, they're not the same string. That does mean that they are true. So a little bit trickier than equality, but very similar, right? And just thinking of it kind of more like a sentence, like an evaluation of whether or not that statement is true or false can make it a little bit easier. All right, nice job, y'all. All right, so now let's check out some of the slightly more straightforward operators in here. And then, yeah, we're cruising along here. It's a pretty short lesson. All All right, so we have our greater than operator. This works as you might expect, right? So we have 5 is greater than 3. Is this true or false? So go ahead and evaluate yes to true. Remember, this little bracket is going to point towards the larger number. That is the evaluation that is happening in place. So if we bumped up the value of y, it would end up with false. How about this? What do y'all think? True or false? True or false? Is 5 greater than 5? Yeah, we got some folks quick on the keyboard here. All right, yeah, so this is indeed false, right? And when we think about it as a statement, as a sentence, it makes sense. Is 5 greater than 5? Well, no, it is 5, right? And that's where we have the greater than or equal to operator. So in this case, it'll work just the same as before. If the number is greater, it'll compare that and go ahead and return true. If these values are the same, it'll also return true. So you can check if it is greater than or equal to that value. All right, not bad at all. Not gonna spend too much time on this because we're just doing the opposite here. So in this case, we have less than operator. We compare these two values with less than. We're saying is x less than y? In this case, yes, 5 is less than 8. And right here, we can do less than or equals to. So is 5 less than or equal to 8? That is true. Even if we change x to 8, that'll go ahead and be true as well, right? So pretty straightforward. No need to think too hard about it. All right, before we jump on to our break, I want to play around in here a little bit. So we talked about different numbers. Let's talk about a couple other values that you might see or we might see getting compared. So let's start with infinity. What do you all think? What is going to be the value here? What value are we expecting? Goodness, I hope so, right? Is infinity larger than 5? Yes. This one should be expected, right? So infinity is sort of a representation of whatever the highest number is. So in this case, it's sometimes, you'll see it kind of sometimes using some strange sort of coding situations. Let's try a different one. So in this case, not a number is still a number. What do we think? Is that going to be greater than or equal to 5? Or sorry, greater than 5? Nice. We got some guesses coming in. Let's take a look. Yeah, so in this case, false. All right, let's see if we can figure out what the bound is of not a number. So what can we do here? Let's do on this side. It says nan, not a number greater than negative infinity. Well, what do we think? What's going on? Yeah. Yeah. All right. Getting some guesses coming. Here's what I'll say about this. And maybe this feels kind of like arbitrary. I think this process of just kind of trying stuff out, making that guess, what do I think will happen? And then going and running it. To me, this is one of the nicest things about programming is that if you don't know something, you kind of just poke around and see what happens. So we want to build that mental model in our head of what do we expect to be happening? What is our assumptions of how the JavaScript interprets code? And it can always be wrong. We can kind of just adjust that. So let's go ahead and run this. So in this case, we get false. Nan is not greater than negative infinity. Does this make sense? Is this like is there a deep meaning behind this? Maybe, but in this case, yeah, I think a nice way to think about this is as Dragosh said, like not number does not have a numerical value. So it really can't be compared here. All right, excellent. Let's check out something like this. What do you all think? What is this going to evaluate to? It's good. Guessing's fun. It's one of the most fun things here. All right, so yeah, false, right? Because these two values are the same, right? We don't expect one to be greater than the other. If we had our equal sign here, that does indeed set equal to true, right? Because these are the same value. All right, how about this? Is A greater than Z? Folks thinking, folks thinking. On my side, it's always interesting to notice when people like immediately start typing out stuff versus we got more of a pause. Tells me some brains are going. All right, let's see what happens. So in this case, it is false, right? Let's play around this again here. We try some other letters out here. We have capital A. We tried capital Z, right? What's going on here? And as we discussed, some of these characters have different values. And so there's some comparison going on there. As always, and I'll turn back to this, this is weird stuff to do. Like, don't do this. Don't do this for real, right? This is a strange comparison to make. It's interesting to know JavaScript does this, and there might be some situations where we might want to rely on some oddity like this. But in general, if you're trying to compare words in some way, we ought to want to figure out a different way to do that than just checking, or hey, how does JavaScript interpret this strange situation? Because we might end up with something kind of unexpected depending on the input. But kind of interesting to know we can use these comparison operators in a lot of different ways. All right, excellent. That's actually it content-wise for this lesson. So a pretty quick one. So again, we warmed up, we talked about different data types, we talked about type coercion versus type conversion. And then we dove into a couple of the different comparison operators. We talked a lot about strict versus loose, equality, and inequality. And then we talked about some of the other operators, which are thankfully a bit more straightforward. So I think what I'd like to do is we can go ahead and take a break now. It's a little bit early, but that's okay. We'll take our 10-minute break. When we come back, we do have a lab that we'll go through. I don't think it'll be too intense. We'll give you all some time to work on that. But also love to know if there's any other questions you all have on any of the JavaScript we just covered. I think now is a good time to ask before we start to dive into some slightly trickier stuff. So on that break, go ahead and take a moment, relax, but also just start to think about, is there anything else that's feeling a little confusing to me? Anything that's not making 100% sense that hopefully we can go into tomorrow with a strong foundation and start to get to some trickier code. All right, sound good, folks? Excellent. All right, I will stop sharing. We'll come back in about 10 minutes or so. See you all soon. Nice break. Thank you. Can we just give me a thumbs up if you're back and awake and upright, present? All right, we got one. Chris. Welcome back, Chris. All right, got one from Joseph, from Timo. Welcome back, y'all. How's everyone else doing? What do y'all do on your breaks? Anything fun? Just get a snack, get some water. All right, quick nap. 2-3 minute nap, perhaps. Tatiana, you hang out with a raccoon? Is that what I'm seeing? Is that unclear? But I hope it was a good time. Painting, get up and walk around. Yeah, getting your legs stretching. It's always good. All right, excellent. So we have a lab today that I think will be pretty straightforward. Before we get to that, though, are there any questions that you all have about any of the JavaScript content we've gone through so far? So we talked about declaring variables, data types. We talked about prompt, running things in the terminal. We talked about comparison operators. Anything still feeling a bit confusing? Anything just wondering for more information about? Any questions before we get into it? right, maybe folks are good. Let me just put it one more way. If I was going to give you a test on some JavaScript content, everyone here would feel great, right? That's the opposite way of putting this. There's no topic at which anyone would be like, "Ooh, don't ask me about that." Great, great is good. All right, excellent. Good. That means we've gone slow enough, perhaps. We've slowly rolled through this content. Don't you worry, it's going to start to speed up at an accelerated pace. All right, so then let's go ahead and do the lab. I think what we'll do for the rest of today, spend a little bit of time doing the lab. We'll talk about it, and then I have a couple of resources that I would like to share with you all that I think will be useful right now, and then a little bit later as well. I want to put on your radar at the same time. So we'll do those two things. Okay, let me share my screen here. Okay, excellent. So, oh, let me go back a page, excuse me. All right, here's a nice picture of a computer. All right, so lab for today is designed to reinforce the fundamental concepts of JavaScript with a specific focus on comparison operators, type coercion, and type conversion. So we have in the instructions over here a lot of sort of like mini challenges for y'all to try out in the code editor. Your goal will be to go ahead and write out that code, test it out, and make sure you get the response that you're expecting you get. This first one has been completed for you all. So let's go ahead and work through that together, and then I'll hand it over to you. So first problem here, the ask is for us to compare the string 10 with the number 10 using the loose equality operator, and then checking what's the result. So first of all, what do y'all think the result should be before we run this code? We were to compare the string 10 with the number 10 using the loose equality operator. Are we expecting true or false? All right, easy, easy. We're expecting true, right? Excellent. All right, and so just as we see up here in terms of the code, so we have let my string equals the string 10, let my number equals the number 10, and then we have a console log statement where we compare my string to my number using the loose equality operator. We also have this comment up here that says question 1. So what we want you all to do is follow the same format for all of the subsequent questions down here. So that means when I start by actually typing out a comment, doing question 2, let's practice doing all the different syntax we need to since we have some time, and then go ahead and follow the instructions here. So this next one is create 2 variables, num1 and num2, different numeric values, use comparison operators to check num1 is greater than num2 and log the result, right? Another thing that you might want to do, not required, just suggestion, you may want to do something like this. Remember, we can add commas to console log, and that'll add a little bit of space in here. And this will make the output a little bit clearer, I think. That way, when we run it, we can actually see what we're looking at, as opposed to just saying true, true, false, true, 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 false, which can get a little confusing when we're trying to check our solutions. All right, any questions about the task at hand? Okay, I think we're good. If you do have any questions, you can of course ask in live chat. I'll say let's put maybe 10 minutes again on the clock. We'll go off record and I can put that timer up again. Once we get back, I'll check to see if everyone's good. If you get to a done spot, please let me know in live chat, because if everyone's getting done, then we can just move on. All right, good luck with these next 5 questions. All right, folks, welcome back. How'd that go? It seems like a lot of folks are getting to a good spot, which is great. It's got an error, it's a good error. All right, excellent. So I think since it seems like folks are on a good path, I'll go ahead and start going over the solutions here. And we can talk through it, and hopefully we can clear up any errors. If there's anyone who's found stuck, we can go from there. Sorry, let me share my screen here. Okay, all right, this is unessential. But did David happen to talk to you all about how to like change your editor colors or theme or anything like that? Sound familiar? Sound familiar rather? No? All right. Cool. Well, we have a little extra time, so let's just spend a moment to play around. This is probably some of the, most verbose JavaScript you all have written in a bit. We're getting to that point where we're trying to write a lot of lines of code. So it's really important to feel comfortable with your editor. You want to feel like it's an extension of you. You don't want to play around with your theme or any of the details about your editor. Just note that you can do so in this view tab in Codio. So for example, for editor font size, blow up the size of that. Or if you like having teeny tiny text, that is a-okay as well. Keep that right there. You can also sort of change some of the themes in here as well, which is part what I wanted to show you all. People seem to like this. It's, only so exciting, I would say, but hopefully you'll get a kick out of it. So you can go to editor theme and change to any of these values. So my default is Cobalt, perhaps the same as you all. Here's the default value. For those of you who like that light mode kind of vibe, that works pretty nicely. I actually tend to like Solarized Dark as well. It's very nice chill color. Seems good. But yeah, there's all kinds of different options to choose here. So hopefully you all can spend a little time, click around on that, and find a few that you like. Oh, here's a cool one. It's called the Matrix. It's very bright, very purple. Sometimes it's nice once you can customize your terminal a bit to get something that feels nice for your eyes wherever you're at. All right, I'll switch back to my default over here. All right, excellent. Let's walk through these examples here relatively quickly. If you have any questions about anything, let me know. All right, so for our question number 2, what we have is our instructions are create 2 variables, num1 and num2, with different numeric values. Use comparison operators to check if number 1 is greater than number 2 and log the result. So we're looking at creating these 2 variables, num1, num2. We can use let or const here, remember. Then we have console log. Our actual comparison that's happening is this statement right here, is num1 greater than num2. We look at the answer over here, we see that is indeed true because 25 is greater than 15. Right, our question 3 or our problem 3 was declare a number num and a string, string, with the same numeric value. Use both loose equality and strict equality to check if num is equal to string, log the results, and analyze any differences. Right, so here we just have 42 and 42, but 42, the second version, is a string. If we use strict equality, we see that this is indeed false. If we use loose equality, this is indeed true. The order here might be swapped depending on which one you did first. Okay, for problem 4, we have to declare a variable, my value, with the value true. Use the number method to convert it to a number and then log the result. So we have my val, and then we have number. I think this is where, if you have the my number error, yeah, that would have already been declared. So it's declared up here. So you have to call this variable something different. But remember, number converts whatever is placed inside of it, inside of those parentheses, into a number of some type. In this case, true and false each have a numerical equivalent. True is 1, false is 0. So when we print that out, we're going to get 1 because my val is true. Take a look at question number 5. We're going to declare a variable num5 with the value 5 and a variable string 5 with the value 2. Use the plus operator to add them together, even though it's saying add them, right? We know that because we have a string, this is going to concatenate and coerce those values together. So we end up with 5 plus 2, 52, getting joined together into a single value. And you can actually kind of tell this data type is indeed a string just because of the coloring. Let me go over this last one here. Create 2 string variables, string 1 and string 2, with different lengths. use comparison operators to check if the length of string 1 is greater than the length of string 2. We had a helpful link here to learn more about length. So length is a property on strings that gives us the length, the number of characters within that string, right? So in this character or this word, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So a 10 character length. And in this one, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So we're checking, is the word JavaScript, the text JavaScript, greater than the length of that word, greater than the string node.js. In this case, that is true. If we swap that around to something else, a little bit shorter, that would go ahead and be false. So those are our different examples here. Namara, you're saying doesn't work. Number 4 for me. If you want to add your code here or let me know what the error is, then I'm happy to help debug. Did anyone else get any errors or anything else not working as expected? Yes, I think the error, if that is the error that you posted from before, the syntax error, my number has already been declared. Yeah. So in this case, on you have here, I guess I'll reproduce that. So let's say my number here. So I run that code, I'll get the same error, right? So identifier my number has already been declared. A couple helpful things to look at here. We see this is happening at line 24. It's happening right here. And then it gives us a couple extra lines right here. So my number has already been declared. So where has that been declared? It's been declared up here at the top in this first example. So we'll just want to change the name of this variable here. So we could change that to, I think what I had before was my num, and change that down below. Just doing that should get it to work. The other option of what you could do is you could remove, for example, this keyword let and keep the name of it. That would reassign a new value to that variable you declared up here. So a couple different ways to fix that problem. All right, cool. Any other questions here? Right, seems we're good. Cool. All right, well, I hope you all have enjoyed this nice, chill introduction to JavaScript. It's going to start to crank up in speed here over the next few lessons. So before we move ahead, I wanted to share a couple resources and ideas for how to prepare, how to practice these skills, and then we'll close out a little bit early for today. So there's a couple different websites I would suggest taking a look at. There are many more, and if you all find some, I would definitely recommend sharing them in the resources channel. I'll add these to the resources channel after I'm done talking about them. The first one here is Code Wars. This is something I'd maybe check out and take a look at. May not be able to tackle these challenges just yet, but might be worth trying to sign up for and see what it's like. So this is a tool, a online platform where you can get code challenges in all kinds of different languages, including JavaScript, and try and write code to solve those challenges. There's a variety of different difficulty as well. So it's really nice to be able to sort of start kind of easy and try and scale up in terms of challenge. So I'll hit this join button here so you can take a look. So just need to enter a little bit of information to get logged in here. Nothing too bad. One thing just a note too, I was thinking about with this we were talking about today about comparison operators. If it's not feeling relevant just yet in terms of why we would use that, even this sort of little login page is going to be using some comparison operators, right? So in terms of if any of these values are in here, if I just try and click enlist, you'll see that we get some errors here of can't be blank, can't be blank, can't be blank. This might be checking, hey, is the value put in here, is the string put in here, does it have a length of 0? Does it have a length of 1 or greater than 0? Is it empty, right? These are some of the checks we could make. And when we have a password in here, right, if they're the same password, is we're going to check for that. If it's too short, too long, stuff like that, right? So these kind of checks will indeed get used as you all build more robust websites. All right, let me get out of the login screen. Only so interesting here. GitHub. You all should just be able to enter in an email and password. Oh dear, this might take a second. All right, there we go. So this is what it will end up looking like, is something like this. And you can go over to practice to try and practice any of these challenges. You'll see on the right over here are a whole bunch of different languages. When you sign up, you're able to define languages you want to work with. So you can see JavaScript here is at the front. And then pick some of the more challenging or less challenging activities to go after. So lots of fun things here. I just want to give you all this as a resource to take a look at and maybe sign up for as you start to get into some more interesting JavaScript code. So that's a good place to practice. Another place to learn would be Free Code Camp. So I really like Free Code Camp. It is free, as the name suggests. It also just has good content. So there's a lot of JavaScript content on the internet. I would say of varying qualities in terms of understandability. This is a great website in that it's interactive. It allows you to slowly walk through a bunch of different concepts and test some different ideas out. So you can see here, there's a number of different topics that you can be learning. Now we're actually going to go through a number of these. This is, I believe, learning in React. We'll do some stuff with databases. We're going to talk, I think, a little bit about backend development. But up here, we have two different lessons I think will be relevant for you all. So this first, responsive web design certification. You can go through all these little micro lessons and learn about HTML, CSS, responsive design. You can see here Flexbox, accessibility, all kinds of different stuff. So if you want to practice those skills, this is a great module to go through. And for JavaScript, we have this as well, where you can go through and take these little micro lessons, start to build different competencies. So this is a great place. I would say it's worth starting at today, this week, just to try and build up your skills. It'll be in a little bit different of a order than we would go through, but I think having a few different paths you're trying to follow is really going to help support all the learning you're doing here and elsewhere. So really useful. And again, one of the things I really like about this, in addition to it being free, is that they're all very tiny little lessons. So it never feels like you're, okay, let me sit down for 45 minutes and figure this out. Sometimes code wars, when you're trying to work on a problem, it can feel like I need to have my brain awake, have my coffee, really feel prepared to do this. This one's much easier to be like, I have 15 minutes. Let me try and knock out a couple of these and see if I can learn something and practice something a little bit new. So I really recommend doing that. As you all are starting to find out, we're going to keep adding more and more and more content. And so it's going to be easier and easier to forget some of the stuff that we had covered in the past. So using the JavaScript module here is going to be great to kind of keep up with JavaScript. That's a little struggle. But I would even recommend, again, going through the HTML and CSS content, even if you feel quite confident with that. If nothing else, it'll be an easy win. You can feel like, nice, I know all this. This is all chill and easy. You don't have to stress about it. On the other hand, perhaps it'll help you remember something that perhaps you've forgotten or introduce something a bit new that we didn't have time to dive into a bit deeper. So hopefully those two resources help out over the next few days. All right, so that's all I got. There's no other questions or anything. So tomorrow we're going to talk about conditional branching, which will be good. And then we're going to start to introduce some more concrete logic into our programs, and we'll be able to use these comparison operators to make decisions in our programs. All right, I think that's it. Anything interesting on this closeout page? Nah, we talked about all of this. All right, excellent. I think we'll pause there. So enjoy the slightly shorter lesson today. Hopefully you all can use the time wisely, take a little bit of break, get back to work, whatever it is you need to do. And we'll see you all tomorrow. I'll be around here as well. I'll be checking messages for the next 20, 30 minutes or so. So if you have anything that comes up, just feel free to jump into live chat.